All right, y'all, welcome to the show. Got a huge show for you guys today, as per usual. High atop a hot Jacksonville, Florida. Of course, this is the Four Verticals podcast episode. What is it now? 196. So about 4 episodes away from episode 200. That's amazing. Almost 200 episodes of us doing this show. We've only been doing this officially for only a couple of years, so that's pretty remarkable that we've been going that far. So, like I said, we have a jam-packed show for you guys today. We have thoughts. Or just some extra thoughts about SEC Media Days and this whole, potential SEC NCAA split. We'll talk a little bit about that. We also have the most critical game in week one. Yes, the fall camps are happening soon, especially for the teams that are participating in week 0. They'll be starting probably in the next couple of weeks, I would imagine. So things are definitely happening very quickly, of course. We also have the team record projection. Of course, this time we have Georgia finally up. I could have sworn, much like with Florida, we did it recently. I was pretty sure we did Georgia already. We didn't. So how about that? So we'll be doing them today, finally. We still have a few more. I think we haven't done Miami and Notre Dame yet. So we'll be doing those eventually. Of course, again, I know a lot of you are probably wondering, hey, where's your reaction and thoughts on the Avengers Doomsday trailer? That will be with the extra pod tomorrow. We'll be doing an extra pod tomorrow. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. We'll have the individual clips coming on YouTube. I think there's some from last one we did. I haven't uploaded yet, so we'll probably do those later today or at some point this weekend. So you'll be seeing a lot of different clips coming up here pretty soon. So there is that. But yeah, we'll talk about the Avengers Doomsday trailer that came out on Tuesday, or was it Tuesday or Monday? I think it was on Monday when the tickets went out. We'll talk about that on the extra pod tomorrow. I'll give you guys my thoughts on that. And if anything breaks over the weekend, of course, this is Comic-Con weekend there in San Diego. So, and of course, Marvel will have a huge presence there. So we'll talk all about that and future content on the road next week for sure. So just be on the lookout for that. Like I mentioned, we do this show twice a week. This is real independent media. Never talked to an advertiser before. Never took a deal from anyone. Never got any emails from anyone. There might be some exceptions I'll make, but for the most part, this is independent media. So there is that. We also, of course, we do this show live every single week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, time varying, usually. And of course, be sure to follow us on the social media platforms, on X, Twitter, and on Instagram. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast feed as well. That's the only place you can get the full version of the extra pod. We do the clips on YouTube, so just be sure that you're aware of that the full extra pod is not on YouTube. It's only the clips only. So that's kind of a weird duality there. We have to kind of make sure you're subscribed to both. So I highly recommend you do that. All those links should be in the channel description. So, and look, I understand a lot of folks don't watch this show. Yes, we have gotten some influx of subscribers recently. But I fully understand a lot of folks don't watch this show, and that's totally fine. I get it. We're still growing. We're not, as I said before, we're not the newest show. We're definitely, we are the newest, one of the more newest shows. We're not one of the oldest ones, but look, we've only been doing this for 2 years and just under 200 shows. So I'm not fully expecting to get, a whole lot of views still. We've been growing slightly, but I totally understand. And that's not realistic. So, to anyone who is watching, regardless of who you are, whether you're a new subscriber or not, just check to see if you are subscribed. And if you are subscribed to the channel, be sure to let any of your friends know. If they're big college football fans, tell them to go check out the channel. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in ski. So, most critical game in week one. A lot of choices, right? Week one's coming up very quickly. Now, I will say, compared to, let's say last year, the docket for week one in terms of major games, it's definitely watered down, but there's still, a large variety of games. Obviously, you have several big games. Unfortunately, some of them are not on campus. They're all neutral site, but that's not to say there's no games. There are games, obviously. It's week one, but compared to last year, yes, the actual punch is definitely way less than last year, or compared to last year. So that I will definitely admit that it's definitely a little bit lower. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean there's no crucial games. there still are crucial games, and there's 3 that we'll talk about, and I'll sort of tell you guys which one I think is really the most crucial game. But we'll go ahead and get this graphic pulled up here, and I'll show you guys which games I am looking at that could potentially be candidates for one of the more crucial games of the year. If I can find it. Actually, hold on 1 second here. I could have sworn I actually made this graphic. Maybe I did not, but actually, you know what? Never mind. We're not going to waste time doing that right now. It's kind of is what it is. So, okay, so no graphic here. I guess I'll have to do this kind of old school. I forgot to make it, and I'm not doing that right now in the middle of the show. I don't think that would be not necessarily right to do that. So, anyway. I'll just read off the games I have listed here. And again, apologies, there is no graphic here for this one or the next one. Now, the next segment was planned. I didn't anticipate making a graphic, but this one I thought I did, but I guess I forgot to. Anyway, so the most critical games in week 1. So I have 3. 2 of them, I guess we'll go through the 2 neutral site games, and then we'll do the game that's actually that'll be on campus. So we have Ole Miss and Louisville. This is on Sunday, I believe. A Sunday or a Saturday. I believe this is on Sunday. It's definitely not on Saturday. I believe this is either a Sunday or a Monday game. I don't believe it's actually on Monday, but I'm pretty sure it's on. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on. It's on Sunday. It's earlier in the day because they have the Wisconsin Notre Dame game being the primetime game on Sunday on NBC. So you have Ole Miss and Louisville. Clearly a huge game, non-con, but again, it is a neutral site game. You have Ole Miss in the Pete Golding era, first time outside of the playoff, with largely the same team back. You have Trinidad Chambliss back. Then you have Louisville of Jeff Brom. I really do expect this game to be very high scoring, right? And of course, we'll eventually do a much more of a proper breakdown. But I don't believe FanDuel has a number for this yet as to who's favorite. I would imagine it's probably Ole Miss. If I had to guess the line, probably like 4.5 or something. So that one obviously could be a candidate, right? It's sort of I'm going to say it's a narrative game, but it kind of is a little bit you could probably make the argument for this Louisville and this game being a litmus test. It's going to have to say, okay, outside of the sort of quote-unquote high you had last year at the playoff or last season going into the playoff and losing Lane Kiffin to LSU, how will Pete Golding act in a normal setting in a regular season game against an opponent that, like I mentioned, is going to score a lot of, it can score a lot of points in Louisville under Jeff Brom. And of course, Jeff Brom's in there for a very long, I guess, yeah, now it has been a very long time now. It's not that long, but he's been around the sport for a long time, and including his time at Purdue. So that one obviously could be on here. Auburn Baylor is interesting, I guess, for like a vibes perspective. I mean, you have Baylor and Dave Aranda. Unfortunately, there was a lot of, I guess there's definitely a lot of feel that there is going to be regime change there at the end of the year. A lot of folks aren't really buying in to him, and is coming into this year, even though they do bring in DJ Lagway, who, much like Dave Aranda, kind of is in kind of a weird situation where last year with Florida, with Lagway starting, look, he was injured a lot. I know that's not that's not the only reason why they struggled. Obviously, he did not play well even without the injury. So, yeah, from the Baylor side, you go to the Auburn side with Alex Golish and the coaching staff coming in, mostly a brand new roster. You lose a lot of talent. The blue chip ratio there for them took a massive hit. So, yeah, that one, I guess, from a vibes perspective, could be the one that you could say is a critical game. But I'm not even going with either of those necessarily. I'm not going with either of those. I'm going with LSU Clemson. And look, we'll do a massive breakdown of this game for sure the week of, right? That Tuesday. But already right now, you have Clemson, LSU, you have Dabo Swinney and Clemson. Everyone's doubting them. You have a new quarterback in Christopher Vizina. A lot of turnover there on the coaching staff. You bring in Chad Morris. You lose a lot of players from last year's team to the NFL, which is amazing that so many Clemson players were drafted back in April and May, and all of a sudden, it's like they have that happen, and then they didn't do anything meaningful in terms of postseason last year. Now you're going to this year, everyone's doubting you. You make all these changes. You're bringing in a whole new, brand new starting quarterback, and a whole lot of questions. So that perspective itself, and again, like I've mentioned before, just imagine Dabo Swinney and Clemson going into the other Death Valley in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and spoiling Lane Kiffin's home opener. That would be probably the biggest story in terms of the sport of college football that weekend. Obviously, that would clearly be a massive. That'll have a pretty significant ripple effect on not only the SEC and maybe your perception of LSU going into SEC play, which again, their first SEC game is on the road at Ole Miss in the rivalry game, and obviously Lane going to Ole Miss as a head coach for the first time ever, I believe. So there's that aspect. But then there's the Clemson aspect of what this does for Clemson, right? You beat potentially what's going to likely be a top 10 team in the preseason. What happens afterwards? Are they all of a sudden like a top 15 team? Is this sort of like a, Florida State, Bama situation where Bama loses to Florida State vaults all the way up to the top 10? And yes, they didn't go to a bowl game last year, Florida State, but that whole game, that whole situation gave Florida State fans hope. Is this the same for Clemson? Would that be the case? Now, for LSU on the flip side, you win this game, you really, established the Lane Kiffin era. I'd imagine you're going to score a lot of points. The big critical issue here of this game, with the LSU standpoint, is obviously Sam Levitt's health, right? Is he fully healthy? Is he ready to go? I'm going to assume yes, he is. I don't think he's officially been named a starter. I could be wrong on that, but there is certainly the likelihood of him starting is pretty high. So this game alone is extremely critical for both. And I think if I had to choose one side, it's very tough though. I mean, you can go either, if you're to go either way here for which game is this more critical for who, you can make a good argument for Clemson. You can make an even better argument for LSU. I'm going to go with Clemson. I think of LSU, yes, there is a essence of you losing this game and all of a sudden the schedule gets even more daunting, that you're struggling with a Clemson team that, again, lost all this talent in the NFL. Bring in a new quarterback. You bring back Chad Morris as the offensive coordinator, not necessarily a new voice. It's a retread hire. So, yeah, from the perspective from the LSU perspective, it would seem like the sky is falling. But the problem is, though, this is such a talented team that I could see two ways where that could really go and two different directions. One direction, obviously, this thing spirals out of control, and then week one or year one or Lane Kiffin all of a sudden goes from all of this hype and all of this opportunity with a somewhat reasonable schedule to all of a sudden you're looking down the schedule and you're going, yes, it's still reasonable, but there's more losable games coming. Or on the flip side, you lose this game and it adds extra motivation to LSU going into the game eventually against Ole Miss down the road. And again, for Clemson, it's more or less a, kind of defying the odds, kind of like what happened with Florida State last year against Bama, right? Sort of getting a jump start to your season, giving yourself insurance, and maybe down the road, again, if Clemson wins this game, they go, 10-2 or something like that, the rest of the way, then that gives you a lot of insurance to get into the college football playoff with a very good resume and a win over. Now, again, some that has to kind of coincide with LSU keeping their end of the bargain and then winning a lot of games too, that you boost your resume. So that game, I think, is definitely the most crucial game, and I think it's I think it's critical. It's the most critical game in week one, but it's also the most in terms of which team is it more critical for. I think it's definitely more critical for Clemson, in my opinion. I don't think it's really that critical for LSU because, again, LSU, there's more opportunities to get bigger wins. But again, you can make the argument, well, if you lose this game to an all different Clemson team, for the most part, and that really isn't a good sign because that Clemson team is way less talented than last year's team that barely made a bowl game. So there's obviously arguments for both here. But I am going to say that this game, LSU Clemson, is the most critical game in week one, and it's definitely more critical for Clemson to get a jump start and to potentially use it as an on-ramp to potentially having a good season. Again, kind of like what happened with Florida State and Alabama last year, right? Florida State wins that game and they end up having a good start, but they ended up falling flat. That's what Clemson needs to avoid if they end up winning this game and are hoping to get to Charlotte for the ACC championship game. So week one, not too far away. We're about, what is it now? Almost a month away or so from week one. Of course, we have week 0 coming up soon, but, you know, at least the way I usually describe week 0 is sort of a week one, part one. Okay. Or it's like, or I guess you can call it like the preamble or the prologue. I think that's what it's called, the prologue or epilogue. I think it's prologue, which is the before the main story. That's what I call week 0. It's basically the prologue, right? Then you get the main story starting with week one. So yeah, college football season's coming soon. You have fall camps happening soon. You have, and of course, as a Bucks fan, we have camp for Tampa also happening at the same time. I believe that started this week, so or in the near future. So a lot of things are happening. Even though you're having a lot of folks, or a lot of even a lot of shows, even on YouTube, taking breaks during this time of the year. Man, this time of year we have to get going. You know, don't be taking days off here. I mean, what are you talking about? I think you know who I'm referring to. But we've talked about that on the extra pod for my reasonings as to why that's the case. But anyway, not to like try to get personal with anyone. Let me get some more water here. I mean, again, it is hot here in Jacksonville, high top of Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, it's like 95 degrees out. So yes, it is hot here. You can also hear the fan going, blowing on me, making sure we're not sweating and whatnot. So I'm gonna get some water real quick, do a little water break. May last a second or two. Then we'll touch on more about this whole SEC NCAA split. And then we'll touch on media days as well from more takeaways from the SEC media days there in Tampa, not far from here. So. So I have some more thoughts about this whole SEC NCAA split, and we talked about this on the show Monday or on Tuesday. And look, I'm not going to necessarily apologize for giving that grim outlook. I still stand by that. I still believe that if this ends up happening with the SEC leaving the NCAA and just basically collapsing the current structure of the sport, that is going to obviously be obviously a massive Rubicon we have never crossed before. But it's also going to be a SHTF, shit hitting the fan. I mean, and there's no way of sugarcoating it. That's going to be a very important moment for not only college sports in general, but the sports world of the United States overall. I mean, that'll be a seminal moment in this country's history of sports. So I still do stand by that is something that is going to have massive ripple effects on not only college sports, but also potentially even pro sports too. So that is obviously a very dire warning. And there's been a lot of thoughts again over the last few days, since the last time we talked to each other about, again, this whole argument of, was this, Sankey saying all this stuff, was it really, real, or was it just him making maximalist threats and the Batman theory and whatnot? But another argument I've seen, and this came from the folks over on the Cover 3 podcast, Fornelli, Bud Elliott, Chip Patterson, Danny Cannell, and all of them, they brought this up, and I wanted to sort of dive into this a little bit. And really speaking to, and what was said on the Cover 3 podcast on yesterday, on Wednesday, was the idea of, okay, Sankey was saying this stuff, but if you really listen to it closely, and I didn't catch this the first time, it's a little bit different than what you're getting from the SEC, state media propaganda, being obviously the SEC network and by extension ESPN and ABC. It's a lot different from what you're getting from that to what actually Greg Sankey really said. And I think that is potentially could be true. Yes, it could be sort of the folks over at ESPN and obviously the SEC network doing sort of like having a little bit of a doing the whole propaganda thing and beating their chest, saying, "Oh, we're, it's our conference versus your conference, and we're better than everyone else. We're so good. We'll take our stuff and leave the current structure of the sport." But then Greg Sankey comes around. It's like, yes, we talked about it, but that's so that's kind of the way they were framing it. It's like, look, you have the state propaganda saying one thing, saying this is absolutely real, and you have other folks by extension also saying that. But then you have Greg Sankey saying, well, it's, we're kind of talking about it, bro, but we're not really talking about it. This is something we've, that's come up a little bit. So again, there's this kind of this weird thing here. Either it's not real, or this is just part of their diabolical plan. And again, I think it's interesting to bring this up, this whole idea of what Sankey said uh, to everyone in his opening filibuster to begin SEC Media Days versus what the state-owned media of ESPN and SEC Network are saying. I mean, you have like people like Heifer Dinich and Paul Feinbaum and Josh Pate, all basically, kind of saying the same version, the same thing, saying, yeah, this is true. And again, I'm not saying they're necessarily lying. I think there's elements of what they're saying that is probably true. And that's sort of what the folks over on Cover 3 said, that, hey, there is some stuff here that's probably true. Yes, there it is obvious that there may have been some discussions going on behind the scenes, but is it really that real? And again, is it, them just saying this stuff, and it's, again, the madman theory, and they're just saying, all this, they're doing this, extreme rhetoric, and it's not going to go anywhere, and this will just blow off? Or is it actually serious? And this is, again, all part of a quote unquote, diabolical plan. I still believe there's some elements of this is real. Now, I know a lot of you, whoever watched this, if anyone watches this, will probably say, okay, well, the guys on Cover 3 and by an extension, 247 Sports and CBS, aren't those guys state-run propaganda for the Big Ten? You're right about that. They are, yes. They are, by, yes, if you want to use that language with ESPN and SEC Network, obviously, the same thing could be said about CBS, right? Again, those guys are, at least currently, for the foreseeable future, are in bed with the Big Ten. Obviously, those guys are going to the Big Ten Media Days. Bud, Fornelli, Chip, and all of them, they will be going up there to Chicago for that. So, yes, that is true. They are also, part of the Big Ten state-run media. And like I mentioned before, this little battle, especially with the fans and stuff, and there's definitely sort of, Cold War vibes of the United States versus the Soviet Union. So there is sort of that, rivalry there. And, you got to feed into the, the hate and stuff like that. But as I've said before, behind the scenes, it's a little bit more complicated than that. There is still the idea that both the SEC and the Big Ten have sort of veto powers over any changes the college football playoff makes, because they are the ones who benefit the most, right? They're the ones who get all of the money and all the incentives, and they get all the playoff spots, or at least all the slots available to them. So that is something that folks need to understand. Yes, there is sort of this Cold War dynamic here, where again, the Big Ten, the SEC, you may as well call them the Soviet Union and the United States, and the, I guess, adding another country as a part of NATO. But again, it's a little more complicated than that. It's not that black and white. It's more or less a very much so a grade situation where, yes, they both hate each other, but they also have to work with each other because of the cultural playoff, and they have veto powers. So, again, it is interesting that they brought this up yesterday. Again, was this, the talking points here from Sankey to the state-run media of ESPN and SEC Network? It differs a little bit, which is weird. So, again, was Sankey hiding his words, and was the state-run propaganda, was it just doing its thing and, acting like seals? Ooh, ooh, ooh. Or is it, or could it obviously have been Sankey sort of kind of hiding behind the fact that the story was getting out? Then you have the state-run media telling the truth and actually saying, yes, this is real, and this is part of the, the whole diabolical plan, if you will. So I don't know. There's definitely a lot of avenues this can take. There's definitely a lot of, theories out there and a lot of rumors and stuff. So again, I do believe there is a lot of evidence to support that this is probably real. Like I said, if this ends up happening, this is going to be a massive Rubicon we have never crossed before, not only in college sports, and again, but the entire history of this country, of having a league, or I guess at this point, a conference separating itself from the NCAA and basically becoming its own sport. And like I said on Tuesday, maybe this ends up happening, we're going to have to see, or we will see the SEC from basically just will totally rebrand, and I guess become its own sports league. So, yeah, a lot of just a lot of weird stuff coming out of Tampa right now. A lot of confusion, a lot of mystery as to what is real and what's not real. So obviously we'll continue to watch this, but again, I still cannot get out of my head the fact that the last time we had big news involving the SEC, and let alone any conference when it comes to like conference realignment and stuff like that, usually happens around this time of the year. And that's not a coincidence. That's there to happen, coinciding with all these big media events. And look, again, throwing it back to the Big Ten, I wouldn't be surprised come next week at Big Ten Media Days that we start to hear similar stuff about, the Big Ten, there's rumors going around that they're not really, they're kind of like the SEC. They just kind of want to go on their own and sort of create their own little league and rebrand and whatnot. Who knows, right? But I just do wonder about the collapse of the NCAA, at least in this way. Now, again, technically it is already dead, but this would definitely be a more or less a symbolic collapse of the NCAA as an institution. And again, it would have massive effect, huge ripple effects on not only college football, obviously, but college sports, pro sports, the entire history of this country. In terms of sports history, this will be one of the biggest Rubicons we've ever crossed. So I'm hoping this doesn't happen. I'm hoping that if this is indeed real, cooler heads prevail, the structure of the sport doesn't completely implode on itself, and we end up avoiding SHTF happening. So unfortunately, I can't really say confidently that that day won't happen, but who knows? Speaking of SEC Media Days, we have some extra takeaways here and some other things I wanted to bring up. A couple of things I want to discuss. Before we do that, take a little water break and then we'll continue on. Again, for those who are new here, again, welcome to the show. Again, we do this show twice a week. I know that, the world seems like it's falling apart as we're all enjoying ourselves and moving around your day. But our show here, we all try to, bring in, we all try to bring you guys in if you're watching this. As a little, escapism. Just try to get away from the stuff that's going on as the world, again, as it's seemingly falling apart. Posted some stuff on Twitter that kind of representative of where we are in the world right now, especially what's happening in the Middle East. I posted a couple of things on X talking about, hey, on my X timeline, you go from seeing stuff about like Avengers Doomsday and you see something about geopolitics. It's like, oh man, you go from happy and excitement and a little bit of escapism to back to reality with the next post you see. So yeah, I get it. It's things are acting or things are just strange right now, but this show here tries to, we try to bring the excitement and the fun and the escapism part of it. So at least for about 45 minutes to an hour a day, or every other day, if you will. SEC Media Day takeaways. There's a few, and actually yesterday brought in the most fireworks. Probably, not to say that other, on Monday didn't have any fireworks pertaining to just coaches only. Not necessarily talking about Greg Sankey's comments, but just some extra thoughts here. We had Will Stein yesterday. We had John Sermon. We had Pete Golding. I think Pete Golding was yesterday and Lane Kiffin was today. So we'll touch on both here. Will Stein at Kentucky. So of course, a lot of folks know Mark Stoops has been out at Kentucky. He was removed from power last year in November. Will Stein comes in. Could have easily stayed out of Oregon. He mentioned it yesterday too. I mean, look, and he sort of said a version of, look, I could have stayed out of Oregon and coached Dante Moore, but he really wanted to take a crack at building a program at Kentucky, a program that really is, and as Bud Elliott calls these programs, either in the Big Ten or in the SEC, to take the checks, take the losses, right? Kentucky fits that mold that they usually take the checks, they get all the money, they focus more on basketball, and then football, you just exist. You don't really serve much of a purpose other than to, be the jobber for the, or at least one of the jobbers for the conference. But with the whole, the stuff going on up in Bloomington, Indiana, with Indiana and Coach Sig, and them going to the playoff, the previous year and then last season, making it and winning the national title, being the first ever 16-0 team in college football history, at least in the modern era. Will Stein, and yesterday, really tried to sell the idea of him using he didn't really say this officially, but at least that was the takeaway most of us got by watching him, talk, whether it be in person or in the case of me, virtually, trying to sell the Indiana model and trying to doing his version of the whole, Coach Sig saying, Google me, Will Stein sort of did a version of that. And look, Will Stein is a sharp man. He's a very good offensive mind. They have some talent to work there. They're obviously, based on what Kentucky did in the portal, and obviously bringing in Will Stein as well, they're clearly spending, like they were doing with Mark Stoops. Now the problem is, though, with Will Stein in Kentucky, it isn't as easy as it used to be. Right? This isn't Kentucky being in the SEC East when you had, what was it, the Bush Jones, Jeremy Pruitt, Tennessee teams. You had Jim McElwain and Will Muschamp's Florida teams, and Georgia in early years of Kirby Smart, especially his first year, and then the back end of Mark Richt. It isn't as easy as it used to be, because now with no more divisions, you're having to play a lot more teams. You're not getting a favorable, or at least a schedule playing against the other crappy teams in the conference, the basement dwellers, and that's not the case anymore, especially now with the addition of OU and Texas. That just means you have, at least every single year now, another loss in the schedule, or multiple, or even more losses. So it's not going to be easy. They definitely have still, even with the additions they have made, particularly at quarterback, they still do not have a sufficient roster to, I think, really make some noise in year one. I think when comparing Big Ten, the Big Ten with Indiana and the SEC of Kentucky, it's just not the same. And the reason why it's not the same is that the lower tiers, or the lower levels of the Big Ten, are much. I mean, obviously they're weaker. Both are obviously weak. I mean, again, you go to the SEC, you have your South Carolinas, your Vanderbilt's most years, your Missouri some years, obviously at Mississippi State, Arkansas. While yes, both lower levels of those conferences, the Power 2, are both obviously really weak, the Big Ten is like ass cheeks weak. I mean, it is like barbecue chicken weak. I mean, it is like, you have teams like Maryland, Northwestern, UCLA. It's just, it is not. You have Rutgers, programs that, again, they're just really there to, basically collect check and, take the losses. But it's just, the dynamics there for anyone to take any of those teams, in this case of Coach Sig in Indiana. It's a lot easier to get that runway going because you have the lower tier teams a lot easier to beat than the lower tier teams in the SEC. Yes, they're easier to beat than the other big boys in the SEC, but again, just the pathway is a little bit different. Obviously, Will Stein doesn't have the coaching experience that Coach Sig has, but again, that doesn't mean in a year or two Kentucky could be winning 8 or 9 games again, like they were at times under Mark Stoops. So that was interesting to listen to yesterday. You have John Summerall yesterday doing his own, trying to sell his future at Florida. And one of those comments he made, I forget the quote, I thought I saved it somewhere, where he mentioned, I believe he was answering a question about the SEC. And he mentioned that, again, this is not a direct quote, but I think his quote went on the line of, he was always taught there was 3 divisions of football. You have the NFC, the AFC, and then the SEC. And he's not wrong. The SEC, again, from top to bottom, is the best, they have the biggest depth. But again, like we've talked about before, the Big Ten has they have the cream of the crop, right? You have Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, most years. So yes, the top-heavy Big Ten is a lot better than the top-heavy of the SEC, but the SEC overall in depth, like we just mentioned, talking about Will Stein in Kentucky, is way more better than what you're going to get in the Big Ten, at least from a depth perspective of all the teams. So Summerall's not wrong on that. So that was interesting to hear sort of him selling his future at UF. And look, I know a lot of folks still doubt John Summerall. No, I know a lot of folks still roll their eyes, and even some Auburn fans are doing that too now, because now they get Alex Kalesh, and again, if it wasn't obvious, Summerall wanted that job. His wife went to Auburn. It was a perfect situation. But then Auburn, doing Auburn things, they screwed it up, and things weren't, going so well, and things got really weird, and he ended up taking the job at UF. So again, I understand a lot of folks are still doubting John Summerall. He's not someone to be reasoned with, or to at least cross with. He's a good coach. There's a reason why he won at Tulane. There's a reason why he won at Troy. Don't do that by accident. That just means he's a good football coach. And if you don't believe me, go ask anyone. Do you understand Troy football, what it was after Neil Brown left for those couple of years? I forget who the coach was. It was like a former, I believe it's a former player from some SEC from some SEC school. was the coach there for a little bit before Summerall got there. And that place is terrible. They're winning like 2 games a year, basically, on average. They're winning like two or 3 games a year. So what Summerall did at Troy, getting them to the Sun Belt title multiple years, and then going to Tulane, replacing a great head coach and Willie Fritz when he went to Houston, continuing that, getting in the playoff last year. So again, anyone who's doubting John Summerall, and not to mention just beyond that, the fact that he's been able to hire actual offensive coordinators. Yes, he's a defensive-minded coach, but unlike guys like Will Muschamp or Zach Garnett or any of these other, bonehead defensive-minded head coaches, he cares about the offense. That's why he brought in Buster Faulkner from Georgia Tech. And again, like a lot of our folks have said, and I agree, we're going to really see who was running the show up there in Atlanta. Was it really the coaching staff there at Georgia Tech, or was it Buster's offense, right? And so I think a lot of folks are probably, a lot of them, not just probably, they do agree with me on that. So, yeah, I think John Summerall there, he is going to build something there. It may not happen necessarily year one, but given how a lot of folks feel about it, a lot of these preseason polls, and even EA Sports has Florida ranked in their own in-game fictional rankings. So this Florida team, again, I know this sounds like you're falling for it again. You're buying the hype again, and you're setting yourself up for disappointment. I get all that. But again, much like last year and this year with Florida, it is real. It's not fake. And I don't know what to tell you. I mean, last year just, it spiraled off control, not to mention DJ Lagway being hurt. I know that those sound like excuses, but I mean, those are factors. I wouldn't call them excuses. So I just think Summerall is going to work there, and I think he's really walked into a very, very good situation. Again, I know a lot of folks will deny it, but the talent's still there. A lot of those guys could have left. Jaden Ball, the running back, he could have left. He could have gone anywhere in the country, all over the United States, to go play somewhere else and transfer. Same with anyone else on that roster. But the majority of those guys, except for the big name being DJ Lagway, they all left. So talent there is still there, and it's a team that I believe warrants the preseason hype. I really do. Then you have Lane Kiffin and Pete Golding, and I think Lane Kiffin was today, in his quote earlier today. It was off context, but I saw it earlier. I don't think it was something. It's sort of like something you'd hear from like Mike McDaniel, who was the former head coach to the Dolphins. He's on a different head coach, or he's on a different NFL roster, coaching roster now. But a similar quote to what he had said last year. I think his quote, at least Mike McDaniel's quote was, "We're like one day closer to death." And then Lane Kiffin at SEC Media Days today says, "We're all dead," or something like that, or "We're all going to die." So, a bit of an interesting quote there to begin Media Days today. But sort of this whole discussion here, I'll move on, about is him and Pete Golding, are they really on good terms? I mean, maybe. Now, I know a lot of folks, and sort of including me a little bit, would want to see a little bit more, I don't know, I guess less friendliness and more, like, not like hate in terms of like you're going to hurt someone, but hate in terms of competitive hate. I don't think we really have a lot of that in the sport. I'm not the only one who's who's been saying who at the very least feels that way. I mean, Josh Pate has said it before. He's not a big fan of coaches being friends and stuff like that. Yes, you can be friends behind the scenes, but at least on the surface, at least have some competitiveness around you. And I it'll be interesting to see if that's really the case. Obviously, these two men will be coaching against each other in September in their first conference game of the year. So, I mean, are they really on good terms? I mean, I guess, but who really knows of that? They could just be, just them saying stuff and whatnot. And obviously, yes, everyone's talking about Lane Kiffin's massive filibuster going on for almost 30 minutes, almost. Not really, but I think it was close to 15. I mean, it's kind of strange comparing Lane Kiffin's monologue today at SEC Media Days, going again almost 20 minutes versus one of I believe I forget which year it was, but it may have been his final year at SEC Media Days. The late Mike Leach only saying total of 5 words versus Lane Kiffin going on for 15 minutes of no questions at all. That's not including questions. That's just him just rambling on and doing I'm just sort of doing this little filibuster almost as if he's at on Capitol Hill talking to the Senate. So. Interesting stuff there from SEC Media Days. A lot of things to take in, of course. the Big Ten media days will be next week in Chicago. So we'll talk a whole lot about that too. Obviously, moving right along here, team record projection. Well, then we'll get out of here. Georgia Bulldogs. You've not done Georgia yet, so this is weird for Georgia here, and I think it's interesting because there's a lot of questions about Kirby Smart and them. Yes, they've had success within the last few years in this whole brave new world of college sports, whether it's the addition of OU in Texas or the transfer portal being a huge thing now. But it's just the thing, the vibe I'm getting from Georgia, whether it be Georgia fans online or folks who are skeptical of Kirby Smart now, even though he's won 2 national titles. And the whole skepticism is that, is the Georgia formula working? Has he fully adapted to this world, this brand new world we live in now in college sports because of the transfer portal and NIL, and the fact that depth, at least being able to stack on top of or at least stacking top 10 recruiting classes on top of each other, that's not realistic anymore. I mean, you could technically do that, but a lot of those guys are going to leave if they don't play. So there's that question. There's also the question about the team in general this year, the lack of wide receiver depth. There's also questions about their ceiling compared to other top programs, right? Particularly quarterback with Gunnar Stockton. I don't know about that. I still blindly trust Kirby Smart, even in this new world. Yes, they have made some mistakes. Whether it's not being really aggressive in the portal, or maybe them having this more staunchness of sticking to high school recruiting. Which, look, you should still do high school recruiting. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but again, this sort of goes back to the whole thing we talked about previously, multiple times at Florida State and Clemson, is that you don't want to be strung one way. You don't want to be like Florida State and rely on the portal 100%, or you don't want to be like Clemson is Apple Sweeney, where you just don't do the portal at all. And that's where Clemson, that's where Georgia is. This weird duality of, yes, they still have a lot of talent. They're still bringing in highly rated recruiting classes, but again, because of the transfer portal and because of NIL, there's no guarantee those guys will be there for the long run. It's not like how it was in 2018 or 2019 or even 2021, where you can't stack recruiting classes on top of each other. You can't have this insane depth. And one of the places where they've really lacked depth in recent years is at wide receiver. They just don't have it right now. It's not necessarily like 100% their fault. I mean, it's not their fault that the sports change it, but it is. You can at the very least say, okay, yes, Kirby and Georgia, they've not done a good job of going into the portal. I mean, Bud on Cover 3 has made that argument over and over again that they have not done that. That's really frustrating. It's even frustrating Georgia fans. They have not been over the moon about that. And it's not. I'm not saying they don't use the portal. Again, they're not totally like Clemson, but they're not too far off. I mean, they brought it up yesterday on Cover 3 that Georgia is one of the youngest teams in the country. And that's not because that's not a bad thing, and they're recruiting insanely well, but it's just, I don't know. That is definitely something to at least think about. And again, there's also questions about what's their actual ceiling with Gunnar Stockton, again, compared to other top programs, right? Ohio State, you have Julian Sand and Jeremiah Smith. Is there a Julian Sand and Jeremiah Smith on Georgia's roster? Not really. I mean, they have a decent starting quarterback in Gunnar, but do they have like a top-end game-changing wide receiver at Georgia right now? Do they really have that? Is that really, something they have in their inventory? No. Do they have Dante Moore on the roster? Do they have a Darian Mensah? Do they have an Arch Manning? Do they have a Byron Brown? But I'll just say this. I mean, look, I know I've been sort of trashing on Auburn's roster and how they lost a lot of blue chip guys to the portal, but I would give Auburn credit here. They at the very least have a much better, at least in terms of quarterbacks. If you're comparing Gunnar Stockton to Byron Brown, yes, is a much more talented quarterback. He's obviously way more athletic. He has a little bit more of a different it factor to him versus Gunnar Stockton. Now, are the two teams in general overall comparable? No, they're not. So that I will also admit. But again, because of my blind trust to Kirby Smart, and because of this schedule that they have, it's a very, very, again, it's not really overly that wholly difficult. They don't play anyone that hard in the non-con, not named Georgia Tech. They start the season off at Arkansas. They get Oklahoma at home. That's good. They get Vanderbilt at home. They go to Bama. again, they still have, even with the win over Bama last year in the SEC title game, they still have the Bama problem, and they have to go back to a place they have not won at in almost 30 years now. It seems like we're getting pretty close. And then they have Auburn at home, and they have Florida, and then basically a home game there in Atlanta. You go to Ole Miss. It's not going to be easy. Depending on how good Ole Miss is at that point, are they still bought in? Is there still hope there? And then you have Missouri, South Carolina, Georgia Tech. I'm not really worried about those teams necessarily. Obviously, South Carolina could have an interim coach by then. Who knows? Then you have Georgia Tech with a whole new starting quarterback, and you bring new offensive coordinator. So before that, I'll bring up the graphic here to sort of give you guys, and no real surprise, I am very high on Georgia. Even with all the things I just mentioned, I still trust Kirby Smart. I still have the blind trust in him. I still trust him and his staff. Yes, their offense is not the most, and they don't really, do anything special on offense, but it's still efficient. They still get the job done. So there's no complaining there, at least with me. I'm not, sitting here alarmed about Georgia's offense overall. But Georgia's two-record projection, again, how we usually do this, that's the best case scenario, worst case, and most reasonable. Best case scenario, 12-0. I know that may shock some people. I know all folks probably go, 12-0, really? But again, like I just said, their schedule is one of the more manageable ones in the country, even with SEC standards. So 12-0 is not impossible. Now, worst case scenario, 9-3. That means you lose to Bama. Probably you lose to Ole Miss. You lose to, I guess, Florida potentially in Atlanta. But then the most reasonable, in my opinion, is the 11-1. I think the most likely loss there is definitely probably Bama. Now, of course, eventually we'll talk about that game as it gets closer here. And that game is in October, so we still have like 2 months left until we really begin to discuss that game. But yeah, Georgia's best case scenario 12-0, worst case 9-3, most reasonable 11-1. And again, I still trust Georgia. Again, I just still have this blind trust. Again, I don't know if it's just me really trusting Kirby Smart. Probably is, but even with all the questions I have about him, it's still like I'm not gonna fully not trust him. There's still a program that I blindly trust. Same thing with programs like Oregon with Dan Lanning. Same thing. You could say the same thing about Ryan Day. Same thing in some cases with a guy like Steve Sarkisian. Maybe not so much as a Kirby Smart or Ryan Day or Dan Lanning, but certainly better than others. So, yeah, Georgia, very high on them. I know their win total is, I believe, 10.5. Yeah, 10.5 there on FanDuel, I believe, off the top of my head. But, yeah, that's it for the show. How about that? Less than 50 minutes. So, we'll be back next week. Schedule permitting there. We're still, you never know the times and stuff. We'll do the extra pod tomorrow. Most likely we'll do that. We'll record that, get it out there again. That's when we'll do our breakdown of the Doomsday Trailer, and that'll probably be like the majority of our show. So we'll do that tomorrow. I'm really excited for that, to really break down the trailer and really talk about it. So we'll do that on the extra pod, and we'll be back next week. So until, at least on the main show here on the channel, at least for the live shows, until next week, take care. Enjoy the rest of your, enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend. Take care, and we'll see you guys.